What role does tourism play in the preservation and degradation of natural heritage? In the modern world, the demand and consumption of culture is more intense than ever before. More efficient aircrafts, the popularization of the personal automobile, the development of highway systems, and growing affluence throughout the world have spurred an increase in international travel heretofore unseen. Alongside this, at the time of writing, there are 1,121 UNESCO World Heritage Sites that span the Earth, 869 which are cultural and 213 which are natural heritage locations. With so much being offered to tourists to explore by UNESCO alone, it is very easy to understand the demand for travel and tourism on a global scale. As summarized by Professor Dallin J. Timothy, nearly every place is clamoring for a piece of the tourism pie because of its potential to generate employment, earn taxes for local and national governments, and stimulate destination economies through increased regional income. This generated income can then be reinvested into both cultural and natural heritage sites, which is in turn a major playing role for the preservation of heritage locations. On the other hand, however, tourism is also a key figure that impacts the degradation of natural heritage sites, and the characteristics, scale, and intensity of tourism operations all have differing implications on this category of locations. Transport is just one amongst several key figures which profoundly affects energy use and carbon dioxide emissions in the tourism sector. Meanwhile, litter and pollution are equally injurious to the historic environment. The United World Tourism Organization estimates that a substantial figure of half of all emissions of tourism could be ascribed to heritage-related tourism globally. Therefore, by investigating the role tourism continues to play on the condition of natural heritage landscapes and locations, we can expect to find methods that help to support changes and practices that in turn limit degradation and promote preservation of natural heritage. Sustainability of these environmental impacts needs to be maintained if the sector is looking to change common practice, establish a foundation for good future habits, and promote successful preservation of natural heritage locations. Heritage sites are used for a variety of purposes, including education, physical activity, leisure, and many more. One common way of classifying heritage is to distinguish between cultural heritage, those things manufactured by humans, and natural heritage, those which have not been manufactured by humans. This is a crucial difference, as natural heritage locations tend to need separate approaches in order to maintain its preservation, as they are usually much larger and more complex than cultural heritage sites. In the same way that we perceive both tangible and intangible aspects of cultural heritage, we could also speak of the tangible aspects of natural heritage, the plants, animals, and landforms, alongside the intangible, its aesthetic qualities and its contribution to biodiversity. Arguably, it is this balance of tangible and intangible qualities that makes natural heritage locations into attractive tourist destinations and a suitable platform for French philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of the tourist gaze. The tourist gaze is a way of perceiving or relating to places which cuts them off from the real world and emphasizes the exotic aspects of the tourist experience. Sociologist John Urry states that without these lenses, the beautiful order found in nature or the built world will be very different. Without appropriate preservation for these natural heritage sites, and if they are left to degrade, then the beautiful order found there and the opportunity for the concept of the tourist gaze will no longer be available to take place. This importance goes beyond the needs of the tourist and the tourism industry, however, as natural heritage is valued for its aesthetic qualities, its contribution to ecological, biological, and geological processes, and its provision of natural habitats for the conservation of biodiversity. Natural heritage locations arguably play a much wider role ecologically in retrospect to cultural heritage sites, and as a result of this, tourists and the tourism industry alike need to ensure they are doing all in their role to preserve and not degrade natural heritage. In regard to natural heritage, tourism may stimulate measures to protect the environment and/or landscape and/or wildlife. For example, when some communities understand their culture as a target of interest to the rest of the world, it can help to develop and maintain a sense of cultural pride, which then triggers preservation practices and promotion for a cleaner environment. This concept has also been proven to be effective with government support, as some countries such as Indonesia have offered prestigious awards for the cleanest and best kept heritage communities. Depending on the amount of visitor traffic and the type of tourism that is being enacted, in many parts of the world tourism is a seasonal activity. Whether for religious purposes at set times of the year or sport purposes to attain the correct weather circumstances, for example, under these conditions tourism may only affect the targeted environment for only part of the year. Therefore, the time where visitor traffic is low or non-existent could allow the affected environment chance to recover. In addition to helping to pinpoint sensitive natural environments, tourism can help to promote the establishment of national parks and/or wildlife reserves. The concept of ecotourism is becoming a popular option for many countries and is a perfect example of preserving sensitive natural areas with minimal human intervention and damage, all while maintaining the social and economic benefits that the tourist industry provides. Countries could accomplish this by preserving locations such as rainforests and places that hold natural beauty, as well as maintain responsible tourist management for these areas. Natural heritage locations can include large bodies of water and natural sacred sites, places that people revere or hold important but that have no evidence of human modification, for example sacred mountains. In the modern world, even rivers continue to be closely associated with great cities and in the contemporary era have become a significant tourism resource. In light of this, rivers have already demonstrated the detrimental effects of human involvement, as in many riverine systems the ecosystems they support are showing considerable stress from irrigation, catchment clearing, pollution, dam construction, and other methods of human intervention. This list should be taken into account when analysing the possible impacts that tourism will hold on natural environments which are similar to that of a riverine, as the same issues could be apparent if not managed properly. In addition to this, as previously mentioned, UNESCO's list includes 213 natural World Heritage Sites and is a universal symbol for the Convention of Heritage worldwide. As explained by the International Union for Conservation of Nature in an annual report, the notion that the label World Heritage represents outstanding universal value gives tourists the expectation that visiting the site will be a unique experience and at the same time provides the tourism industry with an easily promoted and almost fail-proof destination. It is without doubt that the economic surplus of this attention is very beneficial due to the fact that at various levels, whether state, regional or local, tourism is required to pay for the promotion and maintenance of heritage. Despite this, all parties involved in the process, including the tourists themselves, need to work together in order to maintain and preserve the natural locations which will in turn continue to serve the tourism industry. If degradation is allowed to continue and intensify, then we run the risk globally of losing valuable natural heritage locations and damaging local communities and culture. Degradation of natural heritage can occur from several starting points, whether occurring as a direct or indirect consequence. It is argued that, in capitalist societies, customary activities and practices have produced a boundless collection of environmental bads, such as air pollution, global warming, and acid rain. Indirectly, the most obvious concern for this is the fact that the volume of tourists descending on natural heritage areas will only be contributing to these issues, as more tourism equates to greater local pollution, higher emission rates, energy and resource depletion, as well as changing climates. During the time of the Tourist Gaze's first publication, the year 1990, there were around 880 million international passenger arrivals each year, compared with 25 million in 1950. It had been predicted that this figure would rise to 1.6 billion by 2020, however, as of 2018, the figure was already 4.233 billion. It is without doubt that such mobilities have and continue to be hugely costly for the environment. Alongside this staggering progression, the demand to fund travel has had to remain in constant with the growth and as such indirectly contributed to the degradation of natural heritage and the natural built environment. Oil was central to the 20th century, but is now running out and contributes massively to rising carbon emissions and hence to changing climates. While tourism should not be held completely accountable for the depletion of oil and its consequences of use, the industry certainly is a major contributor and such has a large responsibility in consistently aiming to lower emissions and carbon footprint. Directly, tourists and those employed in the tourism industry have much more control over the impacts that they bring individually to natural heritage locations. Issues such as litter, congestion, and human-induced erosion are all first-hand problems that natural heritage sites especially face, but yet can be easily solved with the correct management and education to visitors. A strong example of another current issue is the notion of tourists and visitors walking off prescribed paths and trails. Soil compaction occurs, preventing vegetation from growing and increasing water runoff and erosion. This is a serious issue in national parks and other protected areas, especially locations such as the Swiss Alps, which are so heavily used for ski tourism that they cannot recover fully during the summer period. Over time, the inability of a slope to regrow sufficient vegetation means it's more susceptible to erosion. Erosion is especially dangerous to the natural environment, as too much can trigger landslides and/or further permanent damage to the affected area. Alongside this, when thousands of tourists at a time descend upon small towns and villages, or hundreds of visitors at individual historic sites, overcrowding becomes a serious problem. While the indirect consequence of overcrowding is more emissions and fuel consumption, Direct effects include a large influx in litter and noise pollution to the area, with historic urban centres and heritage shopping villages being especially prone to traffic and pedestrian congestion. While the number of tourists only seem to be ever increasing and adding higher levels of risk, appropriate and responsible management can minimise the impact of tourism on natural heritage. It would appear that the effects of those involved in mass tourism on the French and Spain Mediterranean coastal areas are potentially far greater than a small number of walkers in the Himalayan mountains. However, if this form of mass tourism is well planned and the groups controlled, this can limit impacts to a minimum. Sociologist Ulrich Beck emphasises the importance of limiting impacts to a minimum by describing the detrimental effect of leaving local issues to a mass. Firstly, at a practical level, the pervasive geographical span of environmental dangers demonstrates that locally produced risks create global consequences. This summary strongly argues that small, manageable, and local risks are to be maintained properly before the locally produced problem contributes to a wider pool of similar issues around the world. In order to help this local management, tourism which involves natural heritage areas should be referring to the concept of carrying capacity. There are multiple types of carrying capacity, however, for this instance the most important are environmental carrying capacity and ecological carrying capacity. Environmental carrying capacity usually refers to physical space and the number of people or the number of cars in a particular place. Meanwhile, ecological carrying capacity is a threshold measure, which if exceeded will lead to actual damage of plants or the animal's habitat. A combination of the two should be constantly assessed when allowing natural heritage sites and environments to be used for the purpose of tourism. If reflected appropriately, the risk of degradation will be much lower as the areas will not be susceptible to direct and indirect degradation practices such as overcrowding and vegetation destruction. In addition to the concept of carrying capacity, extra effort to educate the visitors of natural heritage about the detrimental effects tourism has on the environment could spark positive change, especially due to the fact that individual nature-based tourists commonly have widely differing origins, interests, motivations, and behaviours. Due to every visitor holding an individual background and experience, it is crucial that educational avenues are always available to the public so that direct bad practices such as litter and straying from paths can be combated at the first instance. Ultimately, the argument can be made that the role of tourism holds strong influence in the preservation or degradation of natural heritage. Whether tourists can preserve or degrade the area strongly depends upon the type of location, whether sensitive or stable, size of location, and the tourist traffic to the location. An equal share to this responsibility to that of the tourist is those working and contributing for the purpose of tourism and heritage preservation, as they should work together to manage the site responsibly and ensure that effective measures are always in place to minimize impacts from tourists and tourism alike. Concepts such as carrying capacity and ecotourism should become instigated where possible to maintain the social and economic benefits of tourism while practicing preservation, as well as appropriate educational techniques globally to minimize direct issues such as litter, traffic congestion, and vegetation degradation in natural areas. Arguably, if the topic of preservation continues to be the forefront of the focus for natural heritage sites and the appropriate practices are also maintained by tourists and the industry, then the balance between preservation and degradation will shift towards the best interests of nature.